Hello friends, welcome back to Digitalk. So in this session, I am going to cover the basic architecture of Kubernetes, and along with that, what are the different components are there in the Kubernetes. And specifically in this session, we are going to cover one component which is called the pods. Okay, so now in the further subsequent sessions, I am going to cover each and every component in detail, one by one. Okay, so this is the first session, so I will just give you some overview of the architecture of Kubernetes. Okay, what are the different components that we have in the Kubernetes, and then what is pod. Okay, so now one of the prerequisite for understanding the Kubernetes is you should have a basic understanding of containers. Okay, and why? Because your Kubernetes is an orchestration tool which is used to manage the containers. Okay, so you should have some basic understanding of containers. Okay, and then you can able to better understand the Kubernetes. Now when we talk about the Kubernetes, okay, so Kubernetes is called the distributed system. Distributed system. And why it is called distributed system? Because in a Kubernetes there are multiple components. Okay, and those all the components are scattered around the different systems, or you can say different machines. Now what does it mean? So before that, let me tell you what are the important core components of Kubernetes. Okay, specifically in terms of the overall management of the containers using the different components. Okay, so the first basic component is kubectl. Second is kubelet. Okay, so I am just giving you the name and I will tell you the relation between all, and then the functioning of each and every in the subsequent sessions one by one. Okay, and then you have the API server. Okay, and then we have the controller manager. Controller manager, and then we have etcd. Okay, and then we have kube proxy. So these are the core components of your Kubernetes: kubectl, kubelet, API server, controller manager, etcd, and kube-proxy. So that means if you are going to understand the Kubernetes, okay, or specifically the Kubernetes architecture and how it works, okay, then you should have a good understanding of all these core components. Okay, so these are the core components of Kubernetes. Okay, so these are the core components. Now apart from that, we have the some functional components. Okay, functional component. Now functional component means when we define the different kind of a resources in the Kubernetes, okay, then different kind of a functional component that come in the picture. Okay, so let me start with the first. The functional components you can define as a pods, nodes, namespace, deployment, services, replica set, replica controller. Okay, and similarly we have many more functional components. For example, one more is config map, PV and PVC, persistent volume and persistent volume controller, secrets, jobs. So these are the multiple functional component of the Kubernetes. So now specifically when we talk about the Kubernetes from architecture perspective and from learning perspective, okay, this is I'm just giving you an overview. If you are planning to learn the Kubernetes, okay, then how you can from where you can start your journey. Okay, so the very first thing, understand the architecture of Kubernetes, and as I said, it's a distributed system. That means it has a multiple components, what I have listed here. Okay, and these components are scattered around the different machines, okay, different servers, and that is why it is called the distributed system, because all the components or multiple component of the Kubernetes are distributed across the multiple servers. Now why it is distributed, what is the purpose of each, that I'm going to cover in this series completely. Okay, and when we work on the Kubernetes, okay, for the management of your containers, right? So as I said, Kubernetes is a solution, orchestration solution, which is used to manage the container. So that means specifically when we are going to work with the on the containers, the end-to-end management of the containers, Okay, then we define the multiple other resources like pods, nodes, namespace, deployment, services, replica set, replica controllers, config map, PVC, PV, secrets, job. Okay, so all these functional components are we use for, you can say, the management of your containers. Okay, so from architecture perspective, okay, these are the core component. Okay, and then as of now, in this session I will tell you what is pods. Okay, so pod is called the smallest deployable unit. Okay, if you see for the Google, you can search for the Google, and if you look for the pod definition, you will see pod is the smallest deployable unit in the Kubernetes. Okay, but the concept is very small. Okay, if you have a understanding of the containers, okay, then it will be very easy for you to understand the pods. Okay, so when we start our journey, when you are starting your journey for the Kubernetes, okay, so first start from the architecture, how it works, okay, and then come for the functional component. So let me first tell you a basic architecture of the Kubernetes, how it works. So when I'm saying it is a distributed system, so what does it actually mean? What are the different components in the distributed system? Okay, it's a very straightforward and simple architecture. We have a one node, which is the master node, okay, which is also called as control plane. Okay, these are two name of your master node and control plane. Okay, so and apart from that, we have few worker nodes. Okay, so these are, you can consider a different virtual machine or maybe the physical servers. This is one virtual machine. This is another virtual machine. This is another virtual machine, and similarly, we have few more virtual machines. So this one machine is called the master node. Okay, and these other machines in the cluster. Okay, so we are going to make a cluster of the different machines. These are called the worker nodes. Now it is very clear from the name as well. Why we are saying as a worker node? Because they are doing the work. And this is the master. So this is giving the instruction to your worker node, right? This is the work of master and worker as well. So this master, the work of master is to give the instruction to your worker nodes, and the actual execution of the work is done by your worker nodes, right? So now when I said Kubernetes is a distributed system, okay, and as I said, there are a few core components in the Kubernetes, like the kubectl, and then kubelet, API server, and then controller manager, etcd, and kube proxy. Okay, so out of all these components, okay, there are few components which is running on each and every worker node, and some of the components are running on your master node, right? So that means Kubernetes contain the multiple components, and these are the components that I have listed here. Okay, and these components are scattered around the different machines. And what are the different machines? One is your master node, and rest is your worker nodes, right? So what all are the component are running in your master node out of this all, and what all components are working in the worker nodes, why they are working here, what is the purpose of these all these components, that we are going to cover in detail in this series. Okay, so as of now, what I'm going to cover, I'm just giving you an overview what exactly is a pod, because pod is a very basic functionality, or you can say a very basic term, okay, that you will always see in the Kubernetes. And I saw multiple engineers are confused on the pod terms. What actually is a pod? Okay, so let me tell you what exactly is a pod. Okay, so now hope you have some basic understanding of the architecture, like we have a master and controller node kind of architecture, master and worker node, where master is giving the instruction to your worker nodes, and actual work is performed by your worker nodes, right? So let me draw it again. So this is my master node, and suppose I have two worker nodes. Okay, so as I said, few components are running here, and few components of the Kubernetes are running here in worker nodes. Why? That is why we call it a distributed system. Okay. So now what exactly is a pod? So as I said, if you have a knowledge of container, okay. So what is container? Container is a solution, okay, where we group all the software, applications, code, configuration files along with the dependencies of your applications in a single package. Okay, and we deploy it as a container. Okay, so there are multiple container solutions are there in the market. Okay, one of the leading containerized solution is the Docker. We all know about that one, right? Docker is there, but apart from that, there are multiple others as well, like which is mostly used with the Kubernetes as of now. Okay, which is container D. Okay, container D is one other, and then CRIO is the other containerized solution. Okay, and we have a Podman. Okay, so there are multiple others as well, but these are the leading containerized solution that you specifically see in the Kubernetes. Okay, so one of the prerequisites for your container, this Kubernetes is you should have some one of the containerized solution in place. Okay, that means either Docker or either Containerd, CRIO, Podman, or other supported containerized solution should be running. Right. So this is a small overview of what exactly is the containers. Okay. So now when we say pod, okay, so each and every worker node, for example, this is my worker node 1, this is my worker node 2. Each and every pod can have any number of pods. Suppose 2 pods are in worker node 1 and 2 pods are in worker node 2, right? So this is my pod 1, this is my pod 2. Again, here my pod 1 and this is my pod 2, right? Now, what exactly is a pod? What I have inside the pod is very simple. Pod is a grouping of containers. Inside pod, we have the multiple containers. Okay, so simple. Pod is a logical grouping of the multiple containers. Simple. Okay, so now, as I said, for Kubernetes, you should have some containerized solution in place before you install the Kubernetes. Okay, so for example, I have Docker installed, and now I want to manage all the containers with the help of Kubernetes, right? Otherwise, what is the challenge in Docker or some other containerized solution? If you have a multiple containers in your environment, okay, then it is not easy to manage all the containers. And practically, we have the many n number of containers in really in the professional environments, right? So in that case, when the containers are getting increased, the complexity of the end-to-end management is also get increased. Okay, so for that we need some orchestration solution to the end-to-end management of all the containers, and for that we have the Kubernetes, right? So now when we say pod, then pod is a grouping of containers. So that means if in this particular pod I have 4 containers, okay, that means this Docker, with the help of this Docker, I have created the multiple containers like this one. I have multiple containers, and then I have done the grouping of logical grouping of my containers, like 4 containers are in pod 1, and these 4 containers are on my pod 2, these 4 containers on pod 3, and rest of the 4 containers on pod 5. And similarly we can do the grouping of your pods, okay, where we have the multiple containers. So this is a simple term, what exactly is the pod. Okay, now since this is a distributed system, so now each and every pod inside the machines are connected with each other, right? Your different worker nodes are also connected with each other, and each worker node is connected with your master node, right? So that means there's an important role of networking as well in the Kubernetes. You should have a good understanding of the networking as well. Okay, so everything we are going to cover in this series. So this is the first session. So I was just giving you a small overview of what exactly is the Kubernetes, why we use it, and you need some sort of knowledge of the containers because Kubernetes is used for the orchestration or management of the containers. The basic architecture of the Kubernetes, master and then worker node. Okay, so master node give instruction to the worker node, and but we have the basic entity in the worker node. This is called the pod, and pod is nothing but is a grouping of the multiple containers. That's it. Okay, so this is all about the basic overview and architecture of Kubernetes and the definition of or idea of the pod. Okay, now in the subsequent sessions, we are going to cover multiple other components and the functional components one by one in detail with examples. Thank you.